I thought I was just looking at a travel photo. Baalbek, Lebanon. Old stones, blue sky, a tourist standing near the entrance. Nothing strange at first. Then I noticed the doorway. It was too tall, too heavy, too confident. The person under it did not look like the main subject anymore. He looked like scale, a human ruler. The Temple of Bacchus is about 217 feet long, 115 feet wide, and around 102 feet high, almost the height of a 9 or 10-story building. And this was not steel, not concrete, not a modern hotel lobby. It was carved stone, lifted, locked, and decorated. So I zoomed in again. Why would a temple doorway need to feel this massive? Was it made to impress travelers? Or was I looking at the front door of something much older, that Rome only finished? Then I checked the map, and that made the photo even stranger. Baalbek is not in Rome. It is not sitting beside the Colosseum. It is not on the coast, waiting for ships to bring stone, workers, tools, and food. Baalbek sits deep inside Lebanon, in the Bekaa Valley, between mountain ranges, on an inland route that feels almost too quiet for a project this loud. That detail bothered me, because a giant building is one thing. A giant building in the obvious place is easy to explain. A capital city, a major port, a royal center, a place where power gathers naturally. But Baalbek, this was a valley, a real valley, about 75 miles long, and roughly 10 miles wide on average. A long strip of land between the Lebanon Mountains and the anti-Lebanon Mountains, and somewhere inside that landscape, ancient builders raised a temple complex so massive that UNESCO calls Baalbek one of the greatest examples of imperial Roman architecture at its peak. That sounds clean. That sounds official. But when I looked at the geography, the clean answer started to feel unfinished. Because if you were building something this heavy, location matters, roads matter, slope matters, labor matters, water matters, food supply matters, and most of all, transport matters. How do you move carved stone blocks through an inland valley without modern trucks? How do you organize a job site like this without cranes, engines, or steel cables? And why build one of the Roman world's most imposing temple complexes here? Far from Rome itself, the tourist photo had shown me the doorway, but the map showed me the problem. Baalbek was not just big, it was big in the wrong place. And once I saw that, I stopped asking what the gate looked like. I started asking what kind of system could place it there. After the map, I went back to the stones. Not the doorway this time, the columns, because the moment you stop looking at Baalbek like a postcard, the whole place starts acting like evidence. The Temple of Bacchus was not just wide, it was not just tall, it was surrounded by columns so large they made the human body feel temporary. There were 42 Corinthian columns around the temple, and about 19 of them still stand. That number matters, because this is not one lucky wall left behind. This is a surviving pattern, a system. Each column rose close to 65 feet into the air. That is about the height of a 6-story building. But it was not poured concrete. It was not a modern elevator shaft. It was stone, cut, moved, raised, balanced, and decorated. Think about that for a second. A column that tall does not forgive mistakes. If the base is slightly wrong, the top becomes dangerous. If the weight is not handled correctly, the whole thing fails. If the foundation is weak, the temple does not survive centuries. But Baalbek did survive. Damaged, yes. Broken in places, yes. But still standing enough to make the question louder. Who had the skill to raise these stones with that kind of confidence? Who had the workers, the tools, the measurements, the lifting system? And why does the whole structure feel less like a temple built for ordinary visitors, and more like a monument built to make ordinary visitors feel small? That was the second warning. First, the gate looked too large. Then the location felt too strange. Now the columns showed me something heavier. Baalbek was not just oversized. It was engineered to be oversized. And if the columns above were this massive, then the foundation below had to be even more disturbing. Then I stopped looking up. That changed everything. Because Baalbek's biggest secret was not in the doorway. It was not even in the columns. It was underneath them. At the base of the Temple of Jupiter, there are 3 famous stones known as the Trilithon. 3 blocks, placed into the podium wall. Quiet. Straight? Almost too calm. And each one is believed to weigh around 750 to 800 tons. That is about 1.5 to 1.6 million pounds. 1 block. Not the whole wall. Not the whole temple. 1 single block. That was the moment the story stopped feeling like ancient architecture and started feeling like an engineering crime scene. Because a carved column is impressive, a high doorway is impressive, but an 800-ton stone block is a different kind of question. You do not just admire it. You have to explain it. How was it cut? How was it separated from the quarry? How was it moved? How was it pulled across the ground? How was the path prepared so the stone did not sink? How was it lifted into place? And how was it aligned so cleanly that it became part of a wall still being studied today? This is where the official story becomes uncomfortable. Rome had engineers. Rome had roads. Rome had organization. Rome could build aqueducts, bridges, arenas, and cities. That is not the issue. The issue is Baalbek feels like Rome operating at the edge of what we expect from Rome. Maybe beyond it, because these stones were not placed in a flat, modern construction yard. They were part of a sacred complex in an inland valley, far from the imperial capital. And yet there they are. 3 massive stones, sitting in the foundation like they were always meant to be there. No panic. No rough mistake. No obvious failure. Just weight. Precision. Silence. And the more I looked at the Trilithon, the more the first tourist photo changed in my mind. The gate was no longer the mystery. The gate was the invitation. The real question was below it. If the upper temple made people look small, then the foundation made history look small. Because once you see stones this heavy placed with this much confidence, one thought becomes very hard to remove. Maybe Baalbek was not only built upward, maybe it was built on top of something older, something already prepared, something heavy enough that later builders did not erase it. They used it, and that possibility is exactly where the trail becomes darker. Some clues are not hidden. They're just too heavy to move. That is what I felt when I found the quarry. Not a legend, not a drawing, not a strange line in an old book. A real quarry near Baalbek, with stones still lying there, as if the work stopped before someone could clean up the evidence. And this is where the story became much harder to keep simple. Because near the temple complex, less than half a mile away, there are stone blocks even larger than the ones already placed in the foundation. One of them is known as the Stone of the Pregnant Woman. The name sounds like folklore, almost soft, but the object is not soft at all. It is a monster of stone, around 66 feet long, around 14 feet high, and estimated at about 1,000 tons. That is about 2 million pounds. A single block, still sitting in the quarry, still attached to the story, still asking the same question. If this stone was meant to be moved, how? And if it was not meant to be moved, why cut it this way? Then there is the Stone of the South, even heavier, often estimated at around 1,240 tons. That is almost 2.5 million pounds. At this point, the numbers stop feeling like history and start feeling like pressure. Because every extra ton adds a new problem. More friction, more labor, more road preparation, more risk, more planning, more things that must go right. And then, in 2014, archaeologists uncovered another block in the quarry, the Forgotten Stone. That name stayed with me because it felt too perfect. A stone forgotten by time, forgotten by the builders, maybe forgotten by the story itself. This block has been estimated at roughly 1,500 to 1,650 tons, more than 3 million pounds, and it was not on a ship, not on a modern trailer, not inside a museum. It was still there, in the ground, like a sentence no one finished. That is the part that bothered me most. These stones are not just big, they are unfinished decisions. Someone planned them, someone cut around them, someone understood the shape they wanted, and then something changed. Maybe the project failed, maybe the stone cracked, maybe the method did not work, maybe the builders realized they had reached a limit, or maybe something else happened, something sudden enough to leave the largest pieces behind. Because Baalbek does not feel like a place where people slowly gave up. It feels like a place where work stopped with tools still warm. The temple was there. The foundation was there. The columns were there. But the quarry still held stones that seemed intended for a bigger version of the same mystery. And that creates a strange pattern. The stones in the temple prove someone could move the impossible. The stones in the quarry prove someone was planning something even more impossible. So I had to ask it differently. Maybe the mystery is not only how they moved the stones. Maybe the mystery is why the largest stones never moved at all. And if those stones were abandoned, what interrupted Baalbek? This is where Tartaria entered my notes, not as an answer, as a pattern, because by this point, Baalbek had already become too heavy to treat like a simple temple. The gate was too large. The location was too strange. The columns were too tall. The foundation was too massive. And the quarry looked like a project that stopped before the final sentence was written. So I started asking a different question. Not only who built Baalbek, but who was here before the story became Roman. That is where old maps become uncomfortable. For a long time, European mapmakers used names like Tartaria or Tartaria to describe enormous lands across Asia. Not a small city. Not one narrow kingdom. A huge, distant region. A place that appeared on maps, in travel accounts, and in the imagination of the old world. Then, over time, the name faded. Borders changed. Labels changed. The map became cleaner. But cleaner does not always mean more complete. Sometimes a clean map is just a map with fewer questions on it. And that made me look at Baalbek differently. Because Baalbek also has layers of names. Older local worship. Then the Roman name, Heliopolis. Then temples of Jupiter and Bacchus. Then later empires. Later repairs. Later explanations. Each age placed its own label on the stones. But the stones did not change as quickly as the labels. That is the link. I'm not saying Tartaria built Baalbek. That would be too fast, too easy, too careless. But Tartaria matters here because it points to a pattern. Old names, huge structures, missing construction stories, and later empires standing on foundations they may not have started. Maybe that is what Baalbek is showing us. Maybe Rome did not need to invent the whole mystery. Maybe Rome arrived at a sacred place that was already important, already prepared. Already carrying a foundation too massive to ignore. So they did what powerful empires often do. They claimed it. They renamed it. They built on top of it. They gave it gods the empire could understand. And then history began repeating the story from that layer. That does not erase Rome. Rome was real. The Roman temple was real. The carvings, columns, and imperial design were real. But the question is deeper than style. Because style can be added. Names can be changed. Gods can be replaced. But an 800-ton stone block in a foundation is harder to explain away. A quarry less than half a mile away, holding stones over 1,000 tons, is harder to ignore. That is not decoration. That is infrastructure. That is planning. That is a system. And if Baalbek was inherited, then the gate becomes more than an entrance. It becomes a marker. A line between the visible story and the buried one. The upper temple speaks Roman. The foundation speaks older, heavier, lower, like a voice coming through stone instead of text. So maybe Tartaria is not the answer here. Maybe it is the warning. A reminder that names can disappear. Maps can be rewritten. Empires can take credit. And sometimes the only witness that refuses to change is the stone itself. So the real question is no longer just who built the gate. The real question is who laid the ground beneath it, before the world learned to call it by another name. So I went back to the first image, the tourist, the stone gate, the quiet shadow under the entrance. But now it looked different. At the beginning, I thought the mystery was the doorway. Why was it so tall? Why did a human body look so small beneath it? Why would anyone build an entrance with that much weight, that much confidence? That much silence. But after Baalbek, the doorway was no longer the whole story. It was only the surface. Behind it was a temple over 100 feet high. Around it were columns rising nearly 65 feet, like a 6-story building made of stone. Below it were foundation blocks weighing up to 800 tons, and less than half a mile away, The quarry still held stones over 1,000 tons that never moved. That is what stayed with me, not just what was built, but what was left unfinished. Because unfinished things are honest. They show the edge of a plan. They show where confidence stopped, or where something interrupted it. Maybe Rome built what we see. Maybe Rome finished what was already there. Maybe the truth is somewhere between those two ideas, buried under names, repairs, earthquakes, and centuries of explanation. But Baalbek does not feel like a simple ruin. It feels like a handoff. One age leaving stone, another age adding gods, another age changing names, another age calling it history. And still, the gate remains, not answering, just standing, as if it is waiting for us to ask the better question. Not who built the doorway, but who prepared the world beneath it. If you want to go deeper, the next investigation should not look up anymore. It should go down, into the foundation, into the quarry, into the stones too heavy to move, and maybe too important to forget.